back in 2015 timeframe, I was out in Silicon Valley, and this was like a huge thing out there. I will say I had never tried it because back then it definitely had different messaging, and I would love to kind of get into that because I was reading a lot about how you came in and then you took over as CEO and you essentially rebranded this company that, from my perspective, was, big in the valley, engineers. I'm not going to eat it all. I'm just going to have Soylent. And so, of course, for me, I'm like thinking about becoming a mom. I'm like, I'll just make my meals. I'm good. I don't want to just like replace them. Also, I love food. You came in and you kind of rebranded this company. I think when you came in, the margins were maybe not the greatest. It wasn't profitable. And you kind of turned this whole ship around to where now I think I saw like projected sales of over 100 million maybe this year or more. So I just kind of want to dive into that of like what it looked like when you joined the company and what you started implementing.
Yeah, great question. Well, the company started in Silicon Valley by 4 engineers. So that was the natural place for them to start. It was also one of the biggest at the time crowdsourced campaigns for a CPG company. So the whole premise was to be viral, the whole premise to be controversial, and the whole premise was to grow that way in this environment. So we used to call them tech bros, which is a little bit sexist, but essentially all the folks that lived in Valley and they really believe that preparing food and going and doing all the stuff that you need to do around preparing food is a waste of time. They wanted to concentrate on the things they wanted to do. And so like right there. So it started as a following, it started as a group, and it was very viral. It was all driven by the blog of our founder, Rob Reinhardt. That's what created the initial marketing push for the company, and that's what made it really successful to start with. The thing about consumer good companies, though, is that you cannot stay niche forever. For you to grow, for you to create scale, for you to be competitive, you do need to expand from your initial launch and from an initial demographic, which doesn't mean that you're moving away from it. That means that you're just becoming more inclusive as a brand and the product. For a number of years, we were focused on function and really core consumer group of people. So when I took over, one of the things that we noticed that it was very hard to acquire new consumers with the messaging and the setup that we had. And then the second thing that we were trying to do also was literally figure out, how do we reach out to the new consumer? How do we reach out to new demographics, to new geographies, to new places, to people who have never consumed the shake or people who are consuming different shakes and how they think about it? For me, that was one of the key things that we need to solve for. So the first thing we did is we removed all of this very expensive acquisition marketing that many online brands fall into. And essentially, the cost of acquiring a consumer becomes so high that it's almost impossible to recover that cost with any just 1 or 2 new consumers. We reset how we communicate with consumers. We reset how much money we spent on Google and Facebook and the likes. But then the other thing that is even more important in my mind, we actually redesigned the product. We changed the flavor system, we changed the sugar, we changed our carbs, we changed the way it feels, the way it tastes. And we benchmarked ourselves against any other protein shake out there. We didn't say we're going to be better than plant-based. We didn't say we're going to be better against this one specific brand. We said we want to be the best tasting shake out there. And then we wanted to build on the benefits of being a plant-based diet and better for you and all these other good things that we provide. And I think that has really helped us grow into new demographics with new consumers who are mostly concerned with taste, and then they're concerned with function. Whereas if you go back years, people were mostly concerned with function and taste came as a secondary piece, which I believe limited this in our growth. So those would be the 2 main factors that we did, which then enabled us to go to more occasional consumers, to the more impulsive consumer in retail, who is looking at a wall of different beverages. They're trying to choose one. And then once they choose one, how do you make them come back? And the taste and the function is where it starts playing out. And I think that's where we have seen not only growth in terms of revenue, but we have seen improvements in our financials because consumers are choosing to come to us now versus us trying to convince them very actively or very aggressively to come to the brand and try it.
What were some of the more expensive acquisition tactics that you were using that you think other brands kind of fall into?
You come from the technology world and you understand Google, Facebook, and Amazon have become extremely good at convincing us how much money we need to spend with them. And they are efficient. They do bring new consumers. And the more money you spend, the more consumers you will see. And that is true. The hard part to do is to bring the consumers that A, fit your brand, and B, will be with you long enough for you to be able to recover the money that you're spending with them. And I think that's where companies like ours need to step up and figure it out. And I think a lot of companies get into, well, the algorithm is telling me to do this, or my ad agency is telling me to do that. Whereas we're doing the opposite. What we did is we very heavily surveyed our consumers. We very heavily understood the people who are coming to us, and we targeted more of these. So then what we discovered is that towards the end of my first year, more than 40% of our new consumers were word of mouth. So we were spending $0 to acquire them, 40%, almost half. And that happened because they tasted the product, they liked it, they shared it with their buddies and their groups or their fraternities or whatnot. And more people kept coming to us. The other thing that we noticed also is that we started expanding from being the tech bros, which is really a fancy word for a young professional. And we started targeting more young professionals in different fields. So for example, one of our fastest growing groups today is young professional women who happens to be nurses or doctorate students or working in a big bank or whatnot. So we're seeing these clusters of young professionals around the country that drive our revenue. And we're doubling down our efforts to those demographics that we know are ready for our product. And I think that's the key. If you continue to do that, and if you continue to do that in a disciplined manner all the time, I think your Facebook and your Google and your Amazon spending will be successful and it will return good results. But you need to be controlled and you need to be measured. And sometimes we discover that we spend too much. So just last month, we cut down because we're saying, okay, this Facebook spending actually is not returning to us. So we're going to dial it down, and actually our return starts to increase immediately. So it's small things on day to day. And I think it's a collaboration between the big app companies telling you what to do, your agency and your marketing partners advising you what to do. But at the end of the day, if you don't understand your consumer, if you don't have the data, if you don't dig it and you don't really analyze it, you will probably make some wrong decisions.
I'm trying to think about rebranding to someone like me who has this idea of what Soylent was. Like, what did it look like trying to change my mind maybe on what it is versus the new consumers? Like, I think I saw 2/3 of your customers are millennials or younger, which I'm like, wow, that's impressive to tap into that audience. How did you go about that branding to not only go after new folks, but then also maybe reverse the mentality of like what this company was?
I think a lot of our experience has to do with being approachable. I think one of the things that I discovered early on is being an elitist or being like kind of a brand that is only by these people or by those people, it's detrimental to growth. And I think one of the things that we really try to do is, without changing the actual logo or the name of the company, how do we become more approachable? And I think becoming approachable as a brand is the colors that you use, the words that you use, the people who represent you, the way you talk about it, the way your marketing materials look and things like that. And the hard part is that it's 1,000 small things that lead to that, and that constant discovery and constant understanding of your consumer, and then reapplying it and then changing it again and then changing it again. And then really sticking to a brand message, which now people perceive you as more inclusive. And that may include things like we used to have these sharp images of very specific people that were great. But again, they spoke to, it's an urban, it's a very specific area, it's a very specific type of person. We moved away from images like that. We started talking about people who were just normal people, quote unquote. We started using more imagery that we never used before. We started talking about the fact that we help you manage your health, you, not us telling you how to do it. We kind of restarted our educational footprint because we spent a lot of time and effort on educating consumers on what we think is good for them, and then providing them with the science behind it. And I think the way we started doing that changed as well and really helped consumers feel like they're not being spoken at, they were conversed with. And I think that drives consumer engagement and that drives consumer conversation. If you go on Reddit, we either do great, so we're 11 stars, or everything's wrong. We're like 0 stars, right? People are very passionate about it. And that's the conversation we want, right? So when we're screwing up 2-3 years ago with supply chain and deliveries and issues like that, our Reddit was on fire. And today we're seeing different sentiment where people are discussing the benefits, they're discussing how they consume it, they're discussing what health means, they're discussing different alternatives to being healthy. That's how you create engagement. There's downside to it because you better be on top of your game, because otherwise the engagement becomes negative. But if you're on top of your game and you run a good company, this engagement just brings in more consumers and makes it better and better.
Hey, thanks for watching. This segment was made possible by our friends at Salesforce Commerce Cloud. If you're looking for the #1 platform for all your commerce needs, go check out salesforce.com/commerce. And don't forget to subscribe below and tap that little bell icon so you can stay on top of all the amazing new segments and full episodes that we'll be putting out over the coming year with some of the best and most influential commerce leaders out there.